Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of the Temple of Grief for the demise of the country formerly known as the United States of America. And it's Juneteenth, and this feels like an appropriate day to reflect. And if you already know what Juneteenth is and you and your family have already been celebrating Juneteenth, then you can just go about your merry life and enjoy time with family and friends, enjoy barbecue, enjoy whatever you're going to do. Because this conversation you've probably already heard. So this is for the folks who haven't really pondered this much, and those of us who could benefit and also could contribute to the benefit and well-being of all by pausing and pondering for a little while what Juneteenth is. So, and part of the question that I ask myself is, how might a white person, a person who is a descendant of colonizers, a person who is, I think, great-great-grandfather, or maybe great-great-great-grandfather, was a plantation owner who had people enslaved on his plantation. So, and that's only 3 or 4 generations back. So then the question becomes, for me and for many people in my position, and you know who you are if you're in that position, and don't try to deny it because I'm looking at you. The question becomes, how can we look back at our collective history and look forward at our collective future in a way that aspires to the ideals of restorative justice? And so restorative justice is just, I only know a tiny bit about it. It's worth looking into if you've never heard of it. But the whole basic premise behind restorative justice is that justice is not something that should be punitive. Justice is something that should make amends for whatever wrong has happened. And so in a way, I sort of look at this as like an atonement for my ancestors' past. Even though we would all like to believe that we have no responsibility for our ancestors' actions, well, I don't know if you got the memo, but we do. So I want to kind of talk about a few facts and a few collective remembered lies. So the fact I just mentioned, my ancestors 3 or 4 generations ago were plantation owners and had slaves on their property. The collective remembered lie, and I don't remember where I read this. I think it was in one of my family histories. My family's very into genealogy. They're very into documenting family history. And in one of these family histories, I seem to recall, it might have been my great-grandmother writing a passage or a memory about how she remembered that her parents were sort of the good slave owners, the ones that were kind and friendly, and even after emancipation, they stayed on and worked for them, which I'm going to call bullshit on that because I think that's a very limited view of what was likely going on, and it doesn't acknowledge how difficult and complex and challenging it was, both individually and collectively, to move away from the institution of slavery and into something that is much more life-affirming. Because what happened is that we didn't really get rid of slavery. P.S., and if you haven't watched Ava DuVernay's documentary about the 13th Amendment, put it on your list right now and go watch it. We didn't abolish it, actually. We replaced it with the prison industrial complex. If you've been paying attention, you already know that. If you haven't, it's time for us to face our history, because what's happening is our history is coming to a head right now. Um, and I want to kind of talk about what we mean when we say enslavement. And there's a few different ways to be enslaved. There's the very obvious chattel slavery where human beings were treated as animals and property and were abused as such. And so that is sort of the most grotesque form of enslavement. And then there's also indentured servitude, which is any kind of situation where your labor is obligated or owed in some sort of debt to another person or another entity, where you don't have autonomy over your physical livelihood. So that is a different kind of slavery. That's an indentured servitude. And the thing is, when I haven't even gotten to Juneteenth yet, we're just doing like the basics of slavery in the country formerly known as the United States of America. So once slavery was abolished, guess what became illegal? Vagrancy. So can you imagine? Can you imagine being a person who was enslaved under those conditions for your entire life, abused, violated, and you finally get free? We'll say free in quotes. You finally get free and you think, oh man, thank God I don't have to toil doing hard labor all day anymore for someone else's profit. Ooh, yeah. Boy, that certainly does rhyme with today's history, doesn't it? If you want to throw an amen in the comments if that resonates with you, tell me amen. So imagine being in that situation and finally getting free from that and just wanting to lie around and do nothing for, a few days at least. And to be told that just sitting around and doing nothing is an illegal act for which you can be put in jail and be forced to do labor for someone else's profit. Just ponder that for a moment. So then, of course, we realize that the reason this is Juneteenth is because while January 1st, 1863, most of the country then known as the United States of America was waiting for the Emancipation Proclamation to take effect, folks in Texas weren't having it. And they were letting everybody stay in ignorant bliss because the Confederacy was still in charge of Texas. And so it wasn't until 2.5 years later that the Union soldiers arrived in Texas and said, oh, by the way, you have been freed from your enslavement. So on June 19th, 1865, folks who were enslaved in Texas finally got the memo that they were no longer enslaved. So that is considered Emancipation Day. And I think I read in one of the sites I was looking at that this is also considered the second Independence Day for African Americans in the country formerly known as the United States of America. And so I'm going to switch gears because I keep using that phrase, the country formerly known as the United States of America, and have a lot of reasons for doing it. And one of those reasons is to, in my own tiny way, pay homage to the cultural influence of an incredibly influential and incredibly creative, powerful voice in music and art and creation and creativity. You know who I'm talking about. His Purple Majesty, a.k.a. Prince Rogers Nelson, a.k.a. Prince, a.k.a. the artist formerly known as Prince. Because when he did that, It was part of his process of demanding his right to his autonomy over his creative body of work. He said, I am not going to put myself into indentured servitude to the capitalist machine of the record label for someone else's profit. If that resonates with you, can I get an amen? Which is also paying homage to the Southern Baptist African American tradition. You see, all of these things are influence. And in my tarot reading this morning, when I asked myself, how am I going to approach the Temple of Grief today? The first card that came up was the Ten of Pentacles reversed. And it is how to pay recompense, how to atone for things that generations past have inflicted upon others. So I might not have a lot of money to give back to folks, but there are other ways that we can reinvest and reshare whatever we have in terms of wealth and privilege with the folks who were most harmed by our ancestors. We're just feeding the life process in a positive way. Because right now, what's happening is there are forces in this country formerly known as the United States of America that are doing exactly the opposite. We're seeing families being ripped apart. We've been seeing this ever since ICE was established, and it's becoming increasingly terrifying. It is an act of terror being perpetrated on Latino communities and even Native American communities, because frankly, most white people can't even tell the difference. This terror is being inflicted in our own communities. People being deported, to me, sounds just suspiciously similar to Jews being rounded up and put on trains and being deported out of their country into concentration camps. It's not that far of a difference. And children being ripped away from their mothers who are being deported, and then the children being handed off to foster care, which is not an ideal place to grow up, sure does remind me a lot about a film I saw. It was an Argentine film from 1985 called La Historia Oficial, the official story. Absolutely positively worth a watch if you have not seen it. And in this film, which, if you think about when it was made in 1985 in Argentina, and I think that was literally the year their dictatorship fell. So there was probably still a lot of fear of speaking out, although there were many courageous people, in particular the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, for years went and protested in the streets and demanded that their government tell them, what have you done with our sons and daughters who were being kidnapped, tortured, and murdered? And the movie centers on the story of one, we'll say, one family or one set of families, where there's a child that learns, I think she was probably a teenager, she learns that she was adopted because it was her own father who was participating in the military dictatorship efforts of kidnapping and torturing her own biological parents. And so in a move very similar to The Handmaid's Tale, what was happening is pregnant women were being kidnapped and tortured and forced to give birth in these prison camps. And then the babies were given off to the families of military wives who could not conceive. And then the mothers were effectively killed, disappeared. So can you imagine being an adolescent and suddenly learning that your own parents were complicit in the kidnapping, torture, and murder of your own biological parents, and that you were being sent to them for ideological indoctrination, because if you're a baby, you never had any indoctrination. And boy, doesn't that sound a whole lot like what we did to the Native Americans in the Indian schools right here in this country, formerly known as the United States of America. So there are some facts in there, and there are some collective remembered lies. And the reason I bring that up is because it is happening right now. There is KCRW in Los Angeles was reporting that there are Latino families so terrified of leaving their houses to go to the fucking grocery store that there are efforts of people just delivering food to families, sort of on the DL, not trying to call attention to it, because there are so many people living in fear of these ICE raids. So here we are on Juneteenth Emancipation Day, when black folks in Texas finally heard word that they had been freed. At this moment, I would like you to ask yourself, what is your collective remembered lie that you have believed, that you have upheld? And let's please not hang out too much in, guilt and shame. We have to get over the guilt and the shame of it really quickly in order to be able to move past that and into a compassionate, loving place of acceptance of the past and conscious efforts towards making the future a better future. Can I get an amen for that, please, in this temple of grief? So, in the second position of my tarot card reading, it was reversed justice, which to me is all about how we have been looking at justice the wrong way. Our criminal justice system in particular. It is not a criminal justice system, it is a criminal punishment system. And there have been times throughout history, not just here in this country, formerly known as the United States of America, but throughout all history, there have been times when unjust laws had to be broken in the interest of operating in the highest good of all for true justice. So here's a fact that I learned this morning in a report written by, it was a combination of scholars that were sociologists and criminal justice scholars, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. These are going to be no surprise, these numbers, for any of you who've been paying attention at all. 1 in 1,000 black men will be killed by police violence. Now, I don't remember if that's annual or if that's, I don't remember what is the frequency of that figure. But of course, they were also looking at the most likely to be killed by police violence were black and Native American men and women were the most likely to be killed by police violence. Latino men slightly more likely than white men. And here's the fact. Police violence is the leading cause of death for young black men. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that one because it bears repeating. It's worth repeating. Police violence is the leading cause of death for young black men. So I want to pause for a moment. All of us, descendants of colonizers with white skin, I want us all to pause for a moment, because that question that came up about how do we pay recompense for the sins or crimes of our ancestors? What if we don't have any money to give back? And I used to think oh, I don't have any privilege. I don't have any money to give back. I used to say that quite a bit before I realized that what I do have is a much greater ability to walk down the street and not be hassled by police or ICE. So if you have white skin, I want you to ponder that. Imagine not feeling safe just going to the grocery store in broad daylight. Imagine feeling terrified at the side of a traffic cop. And then consider what that does for your ongoing well-being and how that contributes to generational legacies of health compared to what other folks are going through. Right now, we don't even have to look in ancient history. We don't even have to look in recent history. All we have to do is look around us right now. So those are the facts. The collective remembered lie, which somehow still holds power even today, is the fear of the violent black body. Let's just go ahead and or the violent other, because right now the fear is of the Arab world, the fear of Palestinians and Israel, which is it's so preposterous that Israel is committing genocide to Palestinians. And I don't even know how to begin discussing the current conflict between Israel and Iran, so I'm not even going to take one more step into that. But I do want to talk about the collective remembered lie of the fear of the black body, the fear of the black other. And who do we have to thank for that? In large part, not completely, but in large part, we have D.W. Griffith to thank for that, who is he was a filmmaker who was very influential in establishing certain narrative norms, but he also, in his work, Birth of a Nation, upheld some of the greatest collective lies of our cultural founding in this country. And one of those was this fear that white women would be raped by black men, when what was actually occurring in far greater numbers was black women being raped by white plantation owners. So how do we ponder that collective lie and work towards a more conscious, compassionate, and forgiving way forward through the mess we're in right now, here in this country formerly known as the United States of America? So I just want to say we are likely going to be called radically in many, many ways across this country to engage in civil disobedience, because I think we're starting to see the crumbling and dismantling of unjust laws. Well, it's actually the crumbling and dismantling of a system that we thought was justice-based and being replaced with these tacked-on unjust. Anyway, it's a big mess right now, and we need to move through it. And part of the way one of the tools we have in our tool belt is civil disobedience. And because we white people, and I'm a hypocrite here because I'm not probably going to be the one out protesting in the streets. I have some physical conditions that don't make it correct for that to be the thing that I do. I'm going to contribute in other ways. But there are going to be people out there. White people protesting are going to be much less likely to be violently harmed by police. So if you have the resilience, if you're young and have the stamina, and even if you're not young and have the stamina, if you want to go out there, I encourage all of us to be present for these protests wherever they are, King's Day or not, because we are the ones that are going to be less likely to be killed by police. That's the flat out truth. So be an ally. Be the best ally that you can. Be the best ally that you can. And if you don't feel like you're being a good enough ally, be a better one. You don't have to be the best ally. You just need to constantly be striving towards being a better ally. So then, of course, the third card that came through this morning when I was asking the tarot, how should I approach this podcast episode? And it was the reversed Nine of Pentacles. So it really is all about how we are contributing to our material reality in a conscious and just way. That's my take on the whole thing. So today, on Juneteenth, I am not going to ask a single Black person to do work for me. Though, on the other hand, if you want to specifically patronize Black-owned businesses, this would be a great day to do that. To just say, oh, I wonder who are the Black-owned businesses in my neighborhood, and then go give them your business today. That would be a great way for a white person to spend Juneteenth and meaningfully contribute to restorative justice when we think of patronage. And even the patronage of consciously recognizing where our cultural influences have come from. Like, I love to sing the blues, which would not even exist if it weren't for the Black African American musical experience here in this country, formerly known as the United States of America. Dance, hip-hop, cooking, so many things that we celebrate here in this country, formerly known as the United States of America, have come from Black culture. So recognize it, give credit where credit is due, honor it. And let's be as conscious and compassionate and forgiving and as loving as we can to ourselves and to our ancestors, and let's commit to a better future. Thanks for listening. See you next time.